All right, so because this is meant as a continuation or a part 2 of the last video, I'm not even going to do opening credits for this. This is really just for collectors. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the 10 copies of my top 10 all-time favorite Elton John albums and just talk a bit more about what copies they are and, you know, collector stuff. If you think I was being a nerd in the first video, well, I'm really going to nerd out here. I'll go in the same order as I did in the last video. Songs from the West Coast, right? I said before, this is the only vinyl copy of this to be had, and that there was no original vinyl copy. I remember at the time that the album came out, I was really hoping that there would be. I was I was in my early 20s at the time, and I had for years been buying new music on brand new vinyl at a store in my hometown called Blue Streak Records. I'm originally from this beautiful town called Peterborough, Ontario, and there's a store there called Blue Streak Records, and Tim used to always get new vinyl by new bands all the time. All throughout high school, I got like original issue Smashing Pumpkins and Pearl Jam and Beck and Portishead and Radiohead and bands like that. And I always thought, you know, is Elton ever going to release his new stuff on vinyl? And I really hope with West Coast that there would be a vinyl issue. And of course, there wasn't. This was first released in late 2016 as part of a limited box set put out by Burberry. I think I'm pronouncing that name correctly. And this one was, you know, put out on the Mercury label, and it was remastered by Bob Ludwig at Gateway Mastering in Portland. And the lacquers for these two discs cut by Sean McGee at Abbey Road. And it is a double vinyl, and thank goodness, you know, because there have been a few examples of really long albums, you know, from the age of when compact discs reigned supreme, and they were like single LPs rather than double LPs. But with this one, they got it right, and they made it a double LP. And the packaging, at first I will admit I was kind of disappointed that wasn't a gatefold, but I'll live. What do I have in here? Okay, yeah, you got two custom inners with lyrics on them. Yeah. Oh, and the custom the labels were done custom. Sorry, I should hold things up more. I've got this camera going again like I did in my first video because I want people to see overhead stuff. If I can keep my head out of the shot, how many times did I get it in the shot in that first video, and it just annoyed the heck out of me. So yeah, you get inners, and you get, I won't open this because, too much, because if like me, you bought the original CD in 2001, open it up, it's like an accordion style kind of fold out booklet. Yeah, it was so tricky folding the thing. It was like, you know, like when you, in the old days of road maps, you'd unfold the road map because you got lost on the highway, and then it's like, how do I fold this thing back up? It was like that with the original CD booklet for West Coast. Actually, come to think of it, I don't think the LP version of that book is quite as bad. I think it's fairly easy to. Oh, there's David Furnish. I didn't even realize he was in this photograph, but that is David Furnish. I think Bob Halley is somewhere. Well, he's somewhere on the. Oh, here he is, and it's the same image actually that was on the back of the LP. That's Elton's now former personal assistant, Bob Halley. If you have the original CD, you'll notice that the image used on the back has changed. This is not the image that was on the back of the CD. I'm not sure why they switched it, but they did. I think they did just a fantastic job of this, of reissuing this on vinyl. Who was it? Optimal? Okay, so yeah, those are Optimal. This was done by Optimal in Germany, and Optimal does a really, really great job. And they did a lot of those. They have done a lot of Elton's vinyl reissues. This sounds great. I haven't commented really on the sound quality yet. This sounds better than my CD. It does. It sounds better than my CD version. I'm not sure if this is something you can still get. I probably should have checked that before making this video. Whether this is still in print or not, I don't know. Either way, I can't see it in print forever. And if you love this album, I really suggest you track down one of these while you still can, even if you have to pay a bit of a premium. If it's a good shape, it's still worth it, because one day this is going to be a grail, an Elton grail. I mark my words. It's great. It's a great way to enjoy a really great album. Number 9 was Made in England, and I said that this was my my original 1995 UK Rocket LP, and there were, I think, at least 4 or 5 different vinyl issues of this album from 1995. There was the UK Rocket, there was also in Greece, there was one in Brazil. Rocket released copies in Brazil. I keep saying Rocket, I think the label was actually Mercury. But I know that the Rocket logo is on all of these different copies. And then there were two different ones in the United States. In 1995, there was, I think, just a standard weight, standard thickness vinyl edition. And then there was like an audiophile version that was 180, you know, a 180 pressing. This is the only one I've ever owned. It's the only one that I've ever heard. I do have the reissue / remaster that came out last year, and I quite like it. In terms of sound quality, it is so close to this. The 2023 reissue is maybe a little louder, but in terms of the overall tone and the dynamics, it's pretty much as good as this. This one, I'll show you the label. That's what you get. It's a custom label. I don't know who cut the lacquers. I don't know where the lacquers were cut, but there is in the runout, the marker is for DFI, which is actually in France. What was that short for? Disc or Disco France Industrie, which is like French Disc Industries, I guess would be the English translation. I don't know if that means that they just did the metal work in France, or if the lacquer was cut in France too, but you know, it says made in the UK, so I'm guessing that that it was. That pressing ring there, that's about a 1.5, almost 2-inch pressing ring, and that looks very much like the kind of pressing ring that you know, EMI Hayes had. So this, I'm not going to say for sure this was pressed at EMI Hayes, but it does say made in the UK, so I haven't, that's a mystery I'll have to figure out, but, oh, I forgot to show you, because I'm just riffing here. I have no plan. If you get the reissue, okay, you'll get the cover. The cover looks a bit different. The coloring, the tone's a bit different of the cover. I like this one a lot more. Elton looks like, you know, a human being, whereas if you've seen the one from last year, you'll probably have noticed that Elton's skin takes on a very orangey kind of tone. It's like Pumpkinhead Elton or something. I don't know what they were thinking when they prepared the cover image for the reissue. And also with the reissue, when you can pull the record out, it comes in just a standard factory inner, but it's just an insert, a 2-sided insert. Whereas with the original UK issue, you get, because I think it's supposed to have a, yeah, it kind of goes like this. You pull it out like that. See, and then it's actually on, you know, thin but stiff cardstock. It's a sleeve, an inner sleeve, and you get the lyrics on the obverse. It's I got this years ago at a time when I wasn't really collecting a lot of vinyl. I got this when I was a grad student, and it was at a store called Grooves Records in London, Ontario, Canada. It's still going, that store. I was just there actually a few weeks ago. And you know how much I paid for this? This was very rare at the time. I paid, I think, 15 Canadian dollars. But back then, you know, the vinyl revival had not yet happened. So you could still get, you know, hard to find 90s vinyl for, you know, maybe a few dollars more than you'd pay for a standard pressing of, you know, Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, which back then you could get for like $3-4. Those were the days, man. Those were the days. Also, unlike the reissue, you get this. The reissue doesn't have this. There are no titles anywhere on the album. With the original, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can see it there. There's sort of a clear adhesive with the name Elton John and the title of the album, Made in England. that's kind of stuck there. This sounds really good. As I said, this sounds good. The reissue sounds good. So if you can get one of these, go for it. But if you can't, just, you know, get the reissue. All right, next. This is my Monarch pressing. Okay, for this, hold on, because I need to get 2 other copies, because there's something I want to show you about this pressing, and I'm going to get at least, I'll get both. I'll get the 2 other copies. Monarch Records was in Los Angeles. There's something about Monarch pressings that have a kind of quality to them. It's hard to describe. I don't know, there was some secret sauce, some X factor somewhere in their production chain that made their pressings sound, I'm not going to say that they always sounded the best, but they certainly sounded better than most standard pressings of the same albums available at the time on the American market. And the Monarch pressing of Elton John is interesting to me because MCA Universal, I'm not sure if they yet had their own copy of the album master for this, because the lacquers used for this American pressing were actually lacquers cut at Pi Studios in London, and they have the DJM runout codes. So this is effectively an American pressed copy, pressed at Monarch Records, but plated from British lacquers. And I think the lacquer numbers were okay, side 1, the lacquer number was A2, and I think this is B1. Yeah, B1. A2, B1. So you have the benefit of British Pi Records cut lacquers for this one. You also have the added benefit of this being pressed at Monarch Records. Every time that, you know, Monarch did plating, they would add a special number, a very specific number to the runout that would always begin with a triangle, the delta. And so if you collect Monarch pressings, there's usually a delta number in the runouts. And of course, Monarch would also use a die tool and clink and put their MR in a circle. Sometimes it'd be hand etched, but usually it was stamped into the runout, be MR in a circle. And the other telltale sign of a Monarch pressing is the very wide pressing ring, which was different from MCA pressing rings. So that's how you know you have a Monarch pressing. You have MR in the runouts. There should also be a delta number in the runouts. And last but not least, that wide pressing ring. And why is that important? Well, because there are at least 2 other copies out there in the wild of the self-titled Elton John album, Yellow Swirl Uni Records copies, that have Monarch markings in the runouts, but weren't actually pressed at Monarch. And that's because it would appear after Monarch finished pressing its run of the self-titled Elton Johns, MCA retained their stampers and reused them in at least 2 different locations. The first one being the United States. I can't say whether it was Gloversville or Pinckneyville, but they reused them there. This copy, for example, which has a hype sticker for Border Song in the top left-hand corner, this copy was pressed at one of the 2 American MCA plants and has MR in the runout and has a delta number in the runout, but it's not in great shape. This one's really kind of scratched up, but it has that sort of 1-inch pressing ring that's an MCA pressing ring. So this was not pressed at Monarch. And so it doesn't use the same quality of vinyl compound that Monarch used. And Monarch definitely used a better vinyl compound than MCA was using at any of its plants back in 1970. You know, if you're collecting because you really want a Monarch copy, you got to be careful. Sometimes dealers and sellers, if they know to look at the runouts at all, they might identify this as having something to do with Monarch Records, but it's, that pressing ring indicates it's not a Monarch pressing, it's an MCA pressing. I'll show you the other one. Okay, and this is the other Monarch Imposter. I hate calling them that, but this is a Canadian. This is, I believe, the earliest Canadian issue of any Elton John album ever. and it was done by the Compo Company of Canada. This is what I call the Canadian Monarch because it's the same deal. It has the Monarch, the American Monarch issues, you know, all the indicators and the runouts. It's got, well, actually in this case, the MR has been scratched out, but it has the Delta number. But again, there's that 1-inch pressing ring. That's an MCA pressing ring. In this case, it was done at the MCA plant in Canada, but that's an MCA pressing ring. And so I call these Monarch imposters. But a kinder way of putting it is actually, so I call this one, which is the true Monarch pressing, I call this one the true American Monarch pressing, done at Monarch Records in California. This one I call the MCA Monarch because though it reused Monarch stampers, MCA in the States pressed it. And this I call the Canadian Monarch. Of course, of the three, only one was actually pressed at Monarch, but you get the idea. One more thing about this Monarch pressing, then I promise I'll move on. Because it was pressed from British lacquers, it contains the original full-length 60 Years On. The original first-run British copies have a full-length intro, cold opening. You hear one, is it violin or a cello? I can't remember. And then two, and then three, and then it grows, and the crescendo builds, and that goes on for a full 30-40 seconds. But afterwards, for some reason, you know, in subsequent pressings in the UK and just about all American pressings and Canadian pressings, they truncated that. But because this Monarch pressing was based on the UK lacquers, we get that full-length version of 60 Years On. Even though, I'm not sure how or why this is, but you'll notice on the second side, we get the time code actually for the shorter version of 60 Years On. So, yeah, I'm not convinced that this is the earliest, you know, American pressing of the Elton John album, but you know, it's got to be among the very earliest. And it's a very good pressing. It sounds very, very good. Is it my best sounding vintage copy of the self-titled Elton John? I haven't decided, but I have it narrowed down to two, and this is one of them. Let me take a breath. Next is this copy of Madman Across the Water, and in the first video I mentioned that it's the Vinyl Me Please 50th anniversary, very limited splatter vinyl edition of Madman Across the Water. Came out in 2022, and there was the box set, right? And then there was a wide release sort of propeller vinyl special edition of Madman Across the Water. And then that was it as far as wide release stuff went. But if you made your move early on enough, you could get one of these splatter vinyl editions of Madman Across the Water. I said that this has a distinction that I want to talk about. I'll get to that in just a minute. Let's take a look at the sleeve very quickly. It kind of simulates the texture of the original British sleeve. The original British and American and Canadian sleeves were a type of paper that kind of simulated the feel of denim. I'm not sure if that was intentional or if that's just what I want to think because, you know, obviously the cover design was done using embroidery on denim. There's a bit of a texture here, but nothing quite like the original. That said, what a gorgeous sleeve. I know I showed the Vinyl Me Please Honky Chateau in an earlier video, and I mentioned that it was a tipped sleeve, and it's the same deal with this Vinyl Me Please issue of Madman. It's a tipped sleeve. You get the original booklet glued to the interior of the gatefold, the same as the original. The sleeve itself is really, really nice. Now the record, the Vinyl Me Please Chateau was all analog. Again, they used as a tape source the quote-unquote American master for that one. This was not done all analog. The source for this was a 2012 24-bit digital mastering of Madman. I think if I remember correctly at the time, they described it as a mastering from 2012 that was prepared for the UK market. But the distinction here is that this was cut direct metal master, so it's a DMM cut. They didn't cut to lacquer, they cut to a copper master. Direct metal mastering definitely has some sonic advantages. I'm not sure if it was appropriate for an album like Madman Across the Water, but there aren't too many Elton John albums that ever received the direct metal mastering treatment. I know that most North American copies of Greatest Hits Volume 3, because of the length of that album and all the stuff that they crammed onto one LP, direct metal mastering was the way to go. And Howie Weinberg of Masterdisc in New York City did the cut for that one, and that one was also used in Canada. There's also an Australian copy of Tool Over Zero. I'm not sure if it's the original. I don't have any Australian copies of Tool Over Zero, but somewhere, at some point in the 80s, in Australia, Rocket Phonogram there released a DMM cut of Tool Over Zero. And this was done DMM. Does it sound good? I think it sounds very good. I really do. I think it sounds good. It's not, I wouldn't say this is the best sounding modern reissue of Madman out there, but it sounds very good. Get this for just the collector's value, I guess. Maybe not so much for the sound quality, but it's worth having a copy if you can still get one for a good price. Sleeping with the Past. Okay, this was the one where, to be extra annoying, I guess, I didn't tell you in the first video what the copy was, but I did mention that it's the best sounding copy of Sleeping with the Past I have on any format, which is true. So I'll tell you right now, this is the original UK Rocket pressing of Sleeping with the Past, and I haven't said anything yet on my channel about Tim Young. Tim Young was a British, still is, nothing's happened to him, was and still is a British mastering engineer, and he began, I think the earliest UK mastering of any Elton John album that he did was the Fox. He did the original cut of the Fox. At the time he worked at CBS UK. And this is one of his cuts. I can't remember if he was still at CBS at that time. Yeah, TY, that's Tim Young. Tim Young, incidentally, I forgot to mention, Tim Young was the very first non-American mastering engineer ever to win a Grammy. He was the engineer that mastered the 5.1 rendition of the Beatles' Love, and he won a Grammy for that. So he's quite the accomplished mastering engineer. And the pressing ring here indicates that it was pressed at EMI Hayes. Most Elton John albums in the 80s, the original UK copies were pressed at PRS London, Polygram's pressing plant in London, which had the runout code 420. And but just before the Red Strikes Back album was released in the UK, Polygram closed that plant, and so pressing duties went to EMI, and they pressed this one. And there's just something about the way this was mastered. You know, one of this album's drawbacks, if I have to focus on one, and there are some, is that, I mean, the songs are so good, but it's very synthy. And that's not a slight, by the way, on Fred Mandel, who does a lot of the synth work on this album and was an amazing talent. I'm not at all putting him down. But the decision, the production decision to do that makes it sound kind of dated. But the point I'm trying to make here is that with this particular mastering, that glassiness, that sort of digital glassiness is not there. And it's so warm. Yeah, no question, this is the best sounding copy of Sleeping with the Past I have on any format. It's really the only one I play anymore, unless I'm, you know, in the car or something and I have to listen to a digital version. Okay, next is Tool Over Zero, and as I said in the first video, this is the 2016 reissue by Mercury Records. This is not the first copy of Tool Over Zero that I've shown on my channel, so you know how it works. And yes, the reissue, the 2016-2017 reissue sleeve was die cut, and there you go. Oh, did I have it right? Oh yeah, okay, oh yeah. You get the colors on both sides, which, you know, this reissue, artwork-wise, was fashioned after the original UK issue from '83. And the UK issue from '83 was different from the American issue in that they had this sort of color effect on both sides of the sleeve. And so no matter which way you put the sleeve back in, the inner, back inside the main sleeve, you'd get that coloring effect, but it actually differed slightly based on which way you put it in. Anyway, I'm not going to demonstrate the difference there. The real point that I want to make with this one is that, you know, like just about all of the reissues for the last 7-8 years, this is a 180 pressing. It's high quality, remastered from digital by Bob Ludwig, lacquers cut by Sean McGee at Abbey Road. And this sounds so close to the UK original that there are times where I can't tell the difference. I think maybe there's a bit more compression used here. The overall sound is a little less dynamic. The original is maybe a titch warmer. If you live in the UK, you know, finding an original UK pressing of Too Low is probably not going to be too difficult. I would say, you know, look for an original. But if, like me, you're in North America and maybe you just want, you know, a really good sounding copy on vinyl, you know, look no further than this. This is a really good copy to have. All right, next up is Live in Australia. And the copy I showed in the first video was my original 1987 UK Rocket double vinyl copy. I mentioned that it came in a limited edition box set, and I showed you this box. And that's, I can't remember, I used to know whether, like, first of all, here in North America and MCA territory, we never got a limited box set option. That just, MCA didn't do that. But I think there may have been other Rocket territories, possibly Australia, for obvious reasons maybe, that you could get this as a box set if you wanted to. But you didn't have to. I mean, in those markets you could get just a standalone copy if you wanted. They came with light blue, like sky blue obi strips, just as a way of identifying, because they were limited, they were numbered. And the obi had the number. But this one doesn't have one of those. At the time that I got it, it's got some stains on it, which is, I mean, one day I will upgrade this, you know. But it's worth getting, no matter the condition of the box. I'd say it's worth getting because you open it up like this. Okay, let me do this. You open it up like this. It's a clamshell kind of box. And then out comes, I'll show you this first. Out comes the original album. Okay, and seems kind of light for 2 LPs, but they're both in there. And you get, you know, the original gatefold. And my North American friends, you may notice that there are some extra photos here. So the Rocket copies had 2 extra photos in the gatefold. And you get, you know, you get those beautiful custom labels that I showed in an earlier video. That's the side A and side B. You get the same custom labels. And I'm not sure who cut the lacquers for these. There are no initials in this copy, or any copy that I'm aware of, but it does say Townhouse. And the Townhouse was an independent mastering facility and studio downtown London at the time. And so obviously they did a bit of lacquer cutting for this. And they did a very, very good job. Is this a great copy to have? I would say, yeah. It's anything's better than an MCA copy. I'll say that. The North American MCA copies just don't sound, they begin by sounding okay, but then as you get towards the inner grooves, things get really kind of fuzzy and distorted. And you don't get that with the original British issue. This sounds really, really good, really warm. Let's take a look at what else you get in the box. Not that much. You just get this extra booklet, which it's not a reproduction of the tour program, which when I first got this, I kind of thought, oh, that's what it is. And then I took a look at it, and it's not. It's a booklet that gives you a history of the tour, brief history of the tour, and lots of photos from the tour. If, like me, you just adore the Live in Australia album, even if you already have one of the originals, and you find a seller that's selling just the box or just the booklet, then maybe it's worth it just to get the booklet on its own. It's a really, really good keepsake, and has a really well written and researched history of the tour and how the tour turned from stage performance into album. So, Live in Australia. My number 3 was the Fox. And I said this was a Canadian pressing, and it's unusual because it was pressed by a manufacturer here in Canada that didn't normally press Elton John records, and that is true. And that manufacturer was CBS Don Mills, which was originally Columbia Records Canada, and then at some point later on it changed its name to CBS, and was located in a part of eastern Toronto known as Don Mills. And CBS Don Mills was CBS's only Canadian, dedicated Canadian vinyl pressing facility. And in 1980, CBS Don Mills decided to expand their facilities, get newer equipment in, and the manager at the time, his intent was to make CBS Don Mills one of the best vinyl manufacturers in all of North America. There were at the time, well, where else were there? You had CBS Terre Haute, Indiana, that was still online back in 81. CBS Carrollton, and there was one in New Jersey. There's definitely 3. And then in Canada was CBS Don Mills. And I don't think they cut the lacquers for this. I don't know who cut the lacquers. I don't want to say they definitely weren't done in the States, but Tim Young did both he cut the lacquers for the original UK and most of the original American issues of the Fox. And his initials are not in the runouts of this one. So I don't know who cut the lacquers, but Don Mills, CBS Don Mills definitely did the plating and they did the pressing. And this is a contender for the best sounding vinyl copy of the Fox that I have. It just sounds so fantastic. And in a way, I shouldn't be that surprised because I can remember having, back in, the old days when I had my original record collection, most of which I don't have anymore. But I had a lot of Canadian Springsteens from the 80s, and they sounded fantastic. And because those were Columbia, the Canadian copies would have been done at CBS Don Mills. And because they also did, I should add this, CBS Don Mills also did the Columbia House copies of a lot of popular albums. So there's a tendency sometimes when you get a copy of a CBS Don Mills pressing and it has the DM, the initials, and the runouts. Or if it's, depending on what the label was, we have the production code C underneath the catalog number, so that means C as in Columbia or CBS. There's a tendency to see that and think, oh, it's a club copy. But, club copies had additional markings on them that identified them as club copies, and this one doesn't have that. This one is just a standard stock copy. Again, I'm not sure why Quality or later Cinram, didn't handle pressing copies of this. That's assuming that that's actually assuming that this came later. This may have been maybe the very first run of the Fox in Canada, and then afterwards, We Music Canada, they're the ones that did the distribution for Geffen up here in Canada. Maybe that was when they went to Quality Records, because my other Canadian copies of the Fox were all done by Quality Records. It's a long story how I ended up with this copy. I didn't even know it existed until I went out on what I call Elton Safari, which is when I go out. How do I define Elton Safari? Elton Safari is when you go hunting for vintage Elton vinyl and CDs in their natural habitat, which of course is the brick and mortar record store. And I went out on Elton Safari one day and I didn't know what I'd find, and I got some treasures. This is last year, I think, around this time, about a year ago. And I went to this place in Kitchener, Ontario, and they had one of these in the back room. I didn't even know it existed until they came out and I saw the production code. And there's a funny story. They ended up playing this inside their store before I left, and there were some people there who, you try not to judge people from their appearances. You try, but we're all human. We do it, right? They just didn't strike me as the kind of people that would enjoy an 80s Elton John album. But that day when the owners of the store played this before I bought it, there were some people who kind of said, "Hey, who is this? This is a great album. What is this?" And then when it was 80s Elton John, they were like, "What? Really? Okay." Anyway, the Fox. Cpt Fantastic, Japanese DJM, original 1975. I already pointed out that it's missing its obi strip. You know, as far as collector's value goes, that does bring its collector's value down, but I get these mainly for just to have, to play, to enjoy, and I guess for their academic value. So it's not the biggest deal in the world if they don't have the original obi on them. This was pressed in Tokyo by Toshiba. Was it Toshiba-EMI or? Yeah, it was Toshiba-EMI. Yeah, because 1973 was when EMI bought, or Toshiba bought EMI. I can't remember. Who cares? Point is, this was done in Tokyo. And like I said in the first video, you know, I'm not always so crazy about Japanese vinyl masterings of any albums, never mind Elton John albums. They're famous for, you know, having not a lot of low end, and to compensate for not a lot of low end, there's sort of they tend to boost the lower middle end, but that's not the case here. This, I wouldn't say this sounds as good as a UK, you know, DJM original, but it's very, very close. This is just a beautiful sleeve. It's got that you know, Japanese sleeves were, you know, very, very heavy, very thick cardstock. It does come with the 2 books and the poster, and also comes with an extra booklet, which has some additional photos in it. And so this is, I guess, the lyrics in printed in Japanese. And, you know, the art direction doesn't really go with the rest of the album, but that's okay. I got this at a record show a few years ago. No, not a few years ago. It was actually it was, I think, last year. And I'm glad I did. I wish I had more vinyl copies of Cpt Fantastic, because it's my second favorite Elton John album. And, you know, each different copy is a different way of appreciating the album. I'll figure that out later. And this is the original factory inner. I don't use it. I don't like those sort of U-shaped inners, because they're hard to put back in the sleeve. Yes, even harder than the MoFi inners. Last but not least, and I come to think of it, I think I forgot to identify in my first video what pressing this is. Oops. This is an original UK DJM copy, first series DJM. I know that's, you know, there's nothing terribly exotic about that. It's just basically the original UK pressing of Goodbye Albert Road. But this one is in excellent condition, not a lot of scratches on it, very, very quiet, and that's what makes it rare. I'm going to take this out, and there we have the first series DJM labels. This is, you know, this has that sort of hidden translucence. If I were to hold this or the second record up to a strong light, it would glow that sort of dark rose. And like I said, it's so hard to find quiet copies of this. I think probably of all the vintage copies that I have, this is the best sounding one. Nothing beats original DJM, UK DJMs for a lot, not all, but a lot of Elton's 1970s albums. But like I keep saying, the point I want to keep making is that this was a very popular album, and so people bought it, they loved it, they played the hell out of it. Rare is the copy where you don't have scratches all over the place, and this is a very quiet copy. I'd say it's about excellent minus condition in Discogs terms. And so you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Matt, you probably paid a lot of money for that. And here's the thing, I didn't. I paid just 40 Canadian dollars for this. Seriously, original, first series DJM, excellent condition or excellent minus. I paid 40 bucks. I got that at a store that I don't think realized what it was they had. So just, you know, talk about good luck. And it sounds great. It sounds really, really great. I do have another original first series DJM, UK DJM copy, and the sleeve is not in great shape. Actually, it looks like it was run over by a Mack truck. It's flattened. Obviously, someone didn't store it very well, and that can happen to any sleeve. But one thing I notice about some UK sleeves of Elton John records is that they really don't weather well, depending on how people store them. Garrett and Lofthouse manufactured a lot of them, and I mean, they're legendary printer of sleeves, manufacturer of LP sleeves in England at the time. But this particular sleeve was not done by Garrett and Lofthouse. It was done by a printer called Euro Albums Holland. And it's a little thicker, okay? And it seems to have, you know, for an album this copy is 50 years old, it's very square, it's very tight, the spine is great. I would say if you're going to go hunting for a UK first series DJM original, you might be better off looking for a copy that comes in one of these, and the identifier is at the back, at the bottom of the credits here, it says printed by Euro Albums Holland BV. I would suggest if you can get one of these. Like the condition of the discs, that's the most important thing, believe me. But if you can swing it, that you get good condition LPs, but in one of these sleeves, I think that's the killer combo for an original UK Yellow Brick Road. So yeah, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Greatest album of all time by anyone. Really? I know there'll be a lot of people disagreeing with me on that, and you know what? It's a free world. Of course you're going to disagree. We all have our tastes. We all have our likes and dislikes. I'm just reflecting on what mine are. Anyway, this has been, I think both have been really long videos. Thank you if you've sat through all of them. There'll be more videos to come. Please like and subscribe. And don't forget, there never was, and there'll never be. Hey, hold on. There never was, and there'll never be another like Sir Elton Hercules John. Do you like my glasses? There's a reason why I got them. You'll find out in a forthcoming video, okay? All right, thanks very much. Take care.